For 7 years, I believed my wife Rachel cried herself to sleep because she couldn't save her patients. Pause. Until police found potassium chloride hidden in our garage and said, "This is what killed them." In that moment, everything clicked. The woman sharing my bed was a serial killer, and I was her next victim. My name is Michael Chen, 35 years old, certified public accountant in Seattle, Washington. I met Rachel Torres 7 years ago at a charity fundraiser for the Children's Hospital, where she worked as an emergency medical technician. She was passionate about saving lives, worked double shifts, came home exhausted but fulfilled. I fell in love with her dedication to helping others. Rachel was everything I thought I wanted in a partner: intelligent, compassionate, beautiful, and driven by a genuine desire to make a difference. She'd tell me stories about the patients she'd helped save, the families she'd comforted during their worst moments. I admired her strength, her ability to handle life-and-death situations that would crush most people. We married after 2 years of dating, bought a house in Ballard, started talking about kids. Rachel worked the night shift at Harborview Medical Center while I handled the books for several small businesses downtown. Our schedules were opposite, but it worked. When she came home at dawn, I was getting ready for work. When I got home at night, she was preparing for her shift. The first sign something was wrong came 3 years into our marriage. Rachel started coming home from work more upset than usual, talking about losing patients she should have been able to save. "I did everything right," she'd say, crying in my arms. "But they just slipped away." I'd comfort her, tell her she couldn't save everyone, that she was making a difference in the lives she did save. But the losses seemed to be increasing. Rachel would come home 2 or 3 times a week, devastated about another patient who didn't make it. "Maybe you should talk to someone," I suggested after a particularly difficult month where she'd lost 5 patients. "A counselor, or maybe transferred to a different department for a while." "No," she said quickly. "These people need me. I can't abandon them when they're most vulnerable." I respected her dedication, but I started worrying about the toll it was taking on her mental health. Rachel was becoming more withdrawn, spending long hours in our home office after her shift, claiming she was documenting the cases for quality improvement reviews. What I didn't know was that Rachel wasn't documenting her failures to save patients. She was documenting her successes at killing them. The truth began to unravel on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at my desk reviewing quarterly reports when Detective Sarah Morrison called. "Mr. Chen, we need to speak with you about some irregularities at Harborview Medical Center involving your wife." My first thought was that Rachel had made a mistake, maybe administered the wrong medication or missed a critical diagnosis. Medical professionals face lawsuits all the time. "What kind of irregularities?" "We'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to the station this afternoon?" I called Rachel immediately, but her phone went straight to voicemail. She was probably sleeping after her night shift. I left work early and drove to the police station, expecting to discuss a malpractice issue or patient complaint. Detective Morrison met me in a small conference room with walls covered in photos I couldn't quite make out from my seat. "Mr. Chen, we're investigating a series of suspicious deaths at Harborview Medical Center. 9 patients have died unexpectedly over the past 18 months, all during night shifts when your wife was on duty. 9 patients. 18 months." I felt the room spin slightly. "You think Rachel made mistakes that led to these deaths?" "We think your wife intentionally killed these patients using potassium chloride injections that caused cardiac arrest." The words hit me like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Rachel saves lives. She's dedicated her career to helping people." Detective Morrison slid a folder across the table. "These are toxicology reports from the victim. All show lethal levels of potassium chloride in their systems. Your wife was the last person to treat each of them." I opened the folder with shaking hands. Names, dates, cause of death, all cardiac arrest, all night shift, all with Rachel's signature on the treatment logs. There has to be an explanation. Maybe there was contaminated equipment or... "Mr. Chen, we have security footage of your wife injecting these patients with substances not prescribed by their doctors. We also have this." She placed an evidence bag on the table, containing a small glass vial. "Potassium chloride, found in your wife's locker yesterday. the same concentration found in the victims. I stared at the vial, trying to process what Detective Morrison was telling me. My wife, the woman who cried when she couldn't save patients, was being accused of murdering them. It was surreal. Impossible, a mistake that would be cleared up once Rachel could explain. "Where's my wife now?" I asked. "She's being questioned in another room. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you some questions about your knowledge of these incidents." For the next 2 hours, Detective Morrison grilled me about Rachel's behavior, her work schedule, whether I'd noticed anything unusual about her recent activities. I answered honestly. Rachel had seemed more stressed lately, more upset about losing patients, but nothing that suggested she was capable of murder. "Have you ever seen your wife with potassium chloride at home?" "No, never. I don't even know what that is." "It's a salt compound used in medical settings. In large doses, it stops the heart instantly. Very difficult to detect, unless you're specifically looking for it." The questioning felt like it went on. Finally, Detective Morrison stood up. "Mr. Chen, you're free to go, but we'll need you to remain available for further questioning." "What about Rachel?" "Your wife is being held pending charges for 9 counts of murder." I drove home through Seattle's gray streets, the familiar city looking alien now. Everything I thought I knew had just shattered. Pause. But what I was about to discover at home would change everything I thought I knew about evil. "Jesus, Michael, don't talk to anyone else without a lawyer present. I'll recommend someone who specializes in these cases." At home, I sat in our living room, trying to make sense of what I'd learned. 9 people dead. Rachel accused of killing them. Security footage, toxicology reports, evidence in her locker. How could I have been married to someone capable of this and never suspected? And then I realized Rachel wasn't just killing patients. She was slowly killing me too. Pause. But Rachel's next move would destroy everything I thought I knew. I went to Rachel's home office, a room I rarely entered. Her desk was covered with medical journals and what looked like research notes. But as I examined them closer, I realized they weren't about saving lives. They were about ending them. Detailed notes about undetectable poisons, research on cardiac arrest patterns, a notebook filled with names, dates, and clinical observations that read like a hunter's trophy. Pause. Hidden in a folder labeled Exit Strategy were documents that made my blood freeze. Life insurance policies in my name totaling $2 million, power of attorney forms, and a timeline showing Rachel had been planning my destruction for years. She hadn't just been killing patients. She'd been systematically destroying my life, piece by piece. But I was about to discover that Rachel's plan was far more elaborate than I could have imagined. Within an hour, police cars surrounded our home. I watched from the sidewalk as investigators combed through every room, taking photographs, bagging evidence, treating our home like a crime scene. Neighbors gathered, whispering, pointing, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and revulsion. The search lasted 6 hours. When they finished, Detective Morrison approached me with another evidence bag. "Mr. Chen, we found this in your garage." Inside the bag was a case of medical supplies, syringes, vials, and several containers of potassium chloride. I've never seen those before in my life. "They were hidden behind your workbench, along with these." She showed me printed emails supposedly from my account, discussing patient schedules and vulnerability assessments. I felt sick. "I didn't write those emails. I don't even know those medical terms. We'll need you to come in for additional questioning tomorrow. Bring your lawyer." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how my life had become a nightmare. Rachel, the woman I'd loved and trusted completely, was not only a serial killer, she was trying to frame me for her crimes. The next morning, I met Patricia Wells at her downtown office. She was sharp, direct, and immediately got to the point. "Michael, your wife has constructed an elaborate frame job. She's claiming you masterminded these murders for financial gain and used her medical access to carry them out. But I'm an accountant. I don't know anything about medical procedures. That doesn't matter. She's painted you as the calculating mastermind who planned everything while keeping his hands clean. The evidence she's planted is sophisticated. Fake emails, medical supplies, financial records suggesting you researched the victim's insurance policies." Patricia spread files across her desk. The good news is that some of her story doesn't hold up under scrutiny. The timeline is wrong, some of the evidence is obviously planted, and her behavior during questioning shows signs of calculated manipulation rather than genuine grief. What do? We build a case proving Rachel's guilt and your innocence. But first, we need to understand her motive. Why did she kill these patients, and why is she framing you? Over the next week, Patricia's investigators dug deep into Rachel's background. What they found was disturbing. Rachel had been fired from 2 previous hospitals in California for suspicious patient deaths, but the investigations had been quietly closed without charges. She'd moved to Seattle and gotten the job at Harborview by falsifying her employment history. More disturbing was her psychological profile. Expert analysis of her notebooks revealed classic signs of what psychologists call angel of death syndrome. Healthcare workers who kill patients to play God, deciding who lives and dies. But why frame me? I asked Patricia during one of our meetings. Because she needs an exit strategy. Rachel knows the investigation is closing in. By framing you, she becomes the victim, the innocent medical professional manipulated by her controlling husband. It's a way to redirect blame and potentially avoid the death penalty. The frame job was even more elaborate than we'd initially realized. Been setting me up for 2 years, slowly building a false narrative of my involvement. She'd created fake email accounts in my name, planted evidence in our home, and even manipulated our financial records to suggest I'd been researching life insurance policies of her victims. But Rachel had made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated digital forensics. Patricia's tech expert, a former FBI analyst named Kevin Torres, was able to prove that the incriminating emails had been created on Rachel's computer, not mine. The metadata doesn't lie, Kevin explained. These emails were drafted on your wife's laptop, using software to fake the sender information. She also accessed your accounts to plant fake search histories about potassium chloride and cardiac medications. Pause. What we discovered next would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married for 7 years. Even more damaging to Rachel's story was hospital security footage that Patricia's team obtained through legal discovery. The videos showed Rachel acting alone, administering unauthorized injections to patients, and then documenting false information in their medical records. The breakthrough came when investigators found Rachel's real journal, hidden in a safety deposit box she'd rented under a false name. The journal detailed her murders in clinical terms, describing each victim's death as an experiment and rating their reactions to the potassium chloride injections. Most chilling was an entry dated 6 months before her arrest. Michael is becoming suspicious of my work stress. Time to implement contingency plan. If investigation happens, he becomes the mastermind. I become the victim. With this evidence, Patricia was confident the charges against me would be dropped, but she warned me about what was coming next. Rachel's going to trial for 9 counts of murder. You'll likely be called as a witness. The media attention will be intense. She was right. Once news broke that Rachel was a suspected serial killer who tried to frame her husband, our story became national news. Reporters camped outside our house, my photo appeared on magazine covers, and I became known as the husband who almost took the fall. The trial lasted 3 months. I testified about Rachel's behavior, our marriage, and my complete ignorance of her crimes. It was surreal sitting in that courtroom, looking at the woman I'd loved, knowing she'd planned to destroy my life to save her own. Rachel's defense tried to maintain that I was the real killer, but the evidence was overwhelming. Forensics, hospital records, security footage, and her own journal painted a clear picture of a calculating killer who'd murdered vulnerable patients for the psychological thrill of controlling life and death. But what I learned next would change everything I thought I knew about the woman I'd married. The truth was far worse than even I could have imagined. The most difficult part of the trial was listening to victim impact statements from the families Rachel had destroyed. Elderly patients who'd been recovering well until their final shift with Rachel. A young father who'd survived a car accident only to die mysteriously in the ER. A grandmother who'd called her daughter to say she was feeling better, then died an hour later from sudden cardiac arrest. 9 families, 9 lives stolen, 9 futures erased by the woman I'd slept beside for 7 years. When the verdict came back, guilty on all 9 counts of murder in the first degree, I felt no satisfaction, only emptiness. Rachel was sentenced to life without parole, and additional charges were filed for the attempted frame job against me. But the trial's end didn't mean my nightmare was over. The media attention had destroyed my accounting practice. Clients canceled contracts, afraid of being associated with the serial killer's husband. Even though I'd been cleared of all charges, the stigma followed me everywhere. I sold our house. I couldn't live in the place where Rachel had planned my destruction. I moved to Portland, changed my name legally to Michael Park, using my mother's maiden name, and started over completely. New city, new career, new identity. The hardest part wasn't the practical challenges of rebuilding my life. It was the psychological damage of realizing I'd been married to a monster who'd fooled me completely. How do you trust your judgment about people when you lived intimately with someone for 7 years and never suspected they were capable of murder? I underwent extensive therapy with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in trauma recovery. "You're not responsible for Rachel's actions," she reminded me repeatedly. "Psychopaths are expert manipulators. They present false personalities designed to fool the people closest to them." But there must have been signs I missed. Rachel compartmentalized her life completely. At home, she was the loving wife. At work, she was the caring medical professional. In her private moments, she was a killer. She showed you exactly what you needed to see to maintain the illusion. Dr. Rodriguez helped me understand that Rachel's tears about losing patience weren't grief. They were pride masked as sorrow. She was actually bragging about her kills while appearing devastated by failure. 2 years after the trial, I received an unexpected letter forwarded from my old address. It was from James Morrison, the son of one of Rachel's victims. "Mr. Chen, I wanted you to know that our family never blamed you for what happened to my mother. We know you were as much a victim as she was." That letter started a healing process I hadn't expected. Over the following months, I connected with several victim families who'd reached out through Patricia's office. Instead of being angry with me, they expressed sympathy for what I'd endured. "Your wife didn't just kill our loved ones," said Margaret Fowler, whose husband had been Rachel's 3rd victim. "She tried to destroy your life too. In a way, you're the victim who survived." 3 years after Rachel's conviction, I was finally ready to date again. Through a colleague in Portland, I met Sarah Kim, a nurse practitioner who worked in pediatric oncology. When I told her my story, I'd learned to be completely honest about my past. Her response surprised me. "I remember reading about your case," she said. "What struck me wasn't just how evil your ex-wife was, but how strong you had to be to survive what she put you through. That takes character." Sarah and I took things slowly, building trust carefully. She understood my need for transparency, my hypervigilance about potential red flags, my anxiety about being deceived again. She was patient with my healing process, and her work saving children's lives helped me see that there were genuinely good people in the medical profession. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. During my wedding toast, I said something that surprised everyone, including myself. Rachel tried to steal my life, my reputation, and my future, but she accidentally taught me something valuable about resilience and truth. I looked at Sarah, radiant in her wedding dress, then continued. "She showed me that love built on lies will always collapse, but love built on honesty and transparency can survive anything." She thought she was destroying me, but she actually taught me how to love authentically. 5 years after Rachel's conviction, I was building a successful financial consulting practice in Portland when I received a call from Detective Morrison. "Michael, Rachel wants to see you. She's requested a meeting at the prison." My first instinct was to refuse. I'd moved on, built a new life, found happiness with Sarah. Why would I want to see the woman who tried to destroy me? But curiosity won out. I wanted to understand why she'd done what she'd done, both to her victims and to me. Patricia Wells agreed to accompany me to the meeting. The Washington State Women's Correctional Facility was a fortress of gray concrete and razor wire. The visiting room smelled of disinfectant and despair. Rachel was brought in wearing orange prison clothing, her hair shorter, her face harder than I remembered. She looked like a stranger, which I realized she always had been. "Hello, Michael," she said, sitting across from me at a metal table. No emotional remorse, just casual acknowledgement, like we were former colleagues meeting for coffee. "Rachel, why did you want to see me?" "I wanted to apologize," she said, but her tone was flat, rehearsed. "I know what I did was wrong. To the patients, to you, to everyone." I studied her face, searching for any flicker of genuine remorse. Pause. What I found was far more terrifying than I expected. "Do you understand what you put me through?" I was sick, Michael. I wasn't thinking clearly. The stress of the job, the pressure to save lives, it broke something in me. Even now, she was lying. The journal entries, the expert testimony, the evidence all showed calculated planning, not mental breakdown. Rachel was incapable of genuine remorse. "You planned to frame me for 2 years, I said. "That wasn't sickness. That was premeditation." For the first time, her mask slipped slightly. A flash of anger crossed her face before she regained control. "I was protecting myself. You wouldn't understand the pressure I was under. Protecting yourself by murdering innocent people and destroying my life. Those patients were suffering. I ended their pain." There it was, the truth she'd never admitted in court. She believed she'd been merciful, that killing vulnerable people was a kindness. She wasn't sorry for the murders. She was sorry she'd been caught. I stood up to leave. "I forgive you, Rachel. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying hatred for you was poisoning my life." "I don't need your forgiveness," she said coldly. "I did what I thought was right." As I walked away, I realized that seeing Rachel again had given me something unexpected. Closure. She was exactly who the evidence had shown her to be. A manipulative killer without conscience or empathy. Any doubt I had harbored about her guilt was gone. Outside the prison, Patricia asked how I felt. "Free," I said. I spent years wondering if there was some part of the woman I'd loved still in there. Now I know there never was a woman to love. She was always a fiction. 6 months later, our daughter Emma was born. As I held her in the hospital, the same kind of place where Rachel had committed her crimes, I felt only overwhelming gratitude and love. Sarah had called me from my hotel room after the prison visit. "How did it go?" she asked. "Better than expected. I'm ready to come home." "Good. I have news to share when you get back." She'd met me at the airport with a pregnancy test, tears of joy in her eyes. Now, holding Emma, I realized Rachel had tried to destroy my future, but instead had forced me to build something infinitely better. Pause. She thought she was writing my ending, but all she did was teach me how to write my own beginning. Emma will grow up knowing that truth and love can triumph over the darkest deception. She'll know her father survived the ultimate betrayal and chose hope over hatred, rebuilding over revenge. Sometimes the worst betrayal becomes the foundation for the most authentic life you never knew was possible.